Hello, welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kavit Hakway. Well, if you're not aware by now, Ofcom has decided to remove the Iranian English-based news channel Press TV off the Sky platform. This under the pretext that Press TV made administrative errors in its application for a license in 2007. It has also fined Press TV Limited in London £100,000. At the same time, Ofcom has made moves to revoke the license of Press TV Limited in the UK for what it calls Press TV Limited's lack of control over the channel's broadcast. However, media observers say these charges are merely a pretext to remove the satellite channel off the air, as indicated in the WikiLeaks revelation. We're going to examine Ofcom's case and actions against Press TV in this edition of the Press TV News Analysis.
Ofcom has fined Press TV Limited in London £100,000 for the channel's airing of a 10-second news clip. At the same time, Ofcom has made moves to revoke the license of Press TV Limited in the UK for what it calls Press TV Limited's lack of control over the channel's broadcast. Now the question is, if Press TV Limited does not have control over the broadcast, why is it getting fined? If it does have control, why is the license being revoked? Ofcom contradictions are nothing new for Press TV. The British government's media tool has on several occasions changed its decisions regarding Press TV in its 2-year campaign against the alternative news channel. In response to Press TV's complaints about Ofcom's subservience to the British government and the monarchy that have been a focus of Press TV's critical coverage in recent years, Ofcom claims it is not a government organisation. But there is every indication that it is. It gets both its authority and funding from the British government. Ofcom was created by an Act of Parliament and gets most of its funding from governmental granting aid. Britain's Office for National Statistics has also said Ofcom must be reclassified as a central government unit. As a news channel broadcast in the UK, Press TV has shed more light on the British government's domestic and foreign policies. It has aired critical views regarding Britain's involvement in wars of aggression in Iraq and Afghanistan. It has also shown the close ties between the British royal family and UK-founded monarchies in the Persian Gulf region, including the autocratic regimes in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, which have been oppressing their people for decades. Press TV has also provided critical coverage of the extravagant costs of Britain's royal wedding at a time of great financial difficulty for ordinary Britons. The channel covered the 2011 unrest in Britain and the heavy-handed police crackdown, drawing the ire of London's ruling establishment. Now Ofcom, the media arm of the royal family, is seeking to put an end to Press TV's broadcasting in the UK. But it fails to grasp the reality of mass communication in the modern era and the impossibility of containing the flow of information.
Well, lots of reasons there that were cited. Let's get to it since we have little time to cover it. Let me introduce our guest, political commentator Chris Banbury, joins us from London. We have Emmy Award-winning television producer and editor of MediaChannel.org, Danny Schechter, who joins us from New York. Peter Eyre, who's a Middle East consultant, is joining us on the phone from Lima, Peru. And from the Global Research, Rick Rozoff joins us on the phone from Chicago. I'd also like to say that we have invited Ofcom's Director of Standards, Tony Close, to join us, but he has refused to join us in this program, and we're going to represent his lack of presence by this Ofcom logo that you see here with where it emanates from, which is London, as a representative of his lack of being present for this debate. Well, let me thank all our guests for joining us here. Chris Banbury, I'd like to go first to you. British Ofcom Office of Communications is tasked with supervising the irregularities of the media in Britain. It has concluded that Press TV has breached media laws, citing administrative reasons. First off, is their decision legal? And also, would you say that this is perhaps politically motivated?
Well, the first thing I have to say is that for an administrative fault to take the station off the air, which seems to be what Ofcom want to do, it seems a very draconian punishment. And I think it does reveal the ambition of Ofcom and the British establishment to shut Press TV down in this country. Whether it's not legal, I do not know. But Ofcom was set up and given power by the British Parliament, by the British government. I think the most interesting thing about Ofcom is that it's one of those British institutions which poses as being independent, but as your report says, it was set up by the government here, and its members, the people who run it, are appointed by it. They are not democratically elected, and they represent a very narrow range of people who are essentially members of the British establishment.
Well, let me come in here and tell you, just a quick note on this, Chris Manbury. Ed Richards, Ofcom independent body, he has said, he's the chief executive of Ofcom, but he says that Ofcom is independent. Yep. And I need to point that out in a letter that he's addressed on this issue.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Ed Richards is that it's not an independent body, but also Ed Richards was a senior advisor to Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister of this country. And we know Tony Blair's record. He represents, as does his deputy, essentially his deputy in it, people who go from jobs in the media to jobs working for the government to jobs in Ofcom and back again in a sort of carousel. And as I say, it's made up of establishment figures. If you were to look for a critical figure, perhaps a former trade union leader, perhaps someone who's got a record of speaking out in civil liberties, they are absent from Ofcom. There's not a critical voice there. Therefore, I would say it's part of the establishment. And as you said in your report, it's been challenged to say that it should be a state government body. It's not elected, and it doesn't represent a body of opinion from the media, as I say, from different critical gatherings of social society, which does this. And therefore, its claim that it's an independent body, which is someone acting on behalf of the British public or the global public, is false from the start. And I think there's a very motivated agenda here. It's interesting that in this country, and I think the removal from the Sky platform is the most interesting case, because that is how people in Britain would generally get access to it. And I think they are worried about the popularity of Press TV in Britain itself, because it is a critical voice. It won acclaim from its coverage of the Arab Spring, but since then, people who started watching it for coverage of the Arab Spring have been watching it for coverage of Britain, coverage of the unrest and the riots which took place last year, critical coverage of the royal wedding, coverage of Britain's role in the globe. For instance, the story of Sophie, Countess of Wessex, gaining jewels from the Bahraini government, and possibly the Bahrainis were lobbying to get Press TV taken off air, because I'm sure they're using every one of their connections in London to do that. And therefore, I think that's one of the reasons why they want to shut down Press TV. And I also do not believe you can take this issue away from the fact that Britain is in the forefront of the campaign to try and vilify Iran with the possible threats of action against Iran over the question of nuclear power, despite the fact that Britain is a nuclear power itself, that illegally supplied Israel with a basis for nuclear weapons, and is about to replace its own nuclear missile system. I don't think you can extract this question from that.
Well, many political reasons there, but let's move on to another subject. Danny Schechter, I'm confused about this. Maybe you could tell us or explain it to us. Ofcom has also decided that it should remove the channel from the Sky platform under the pretext that the content of the programs produced in Britain is supervised by the office in Tehran. But Press TV from the very outset announced that it is a Tehran-based TV channel.
Well, all of these pretexts, all of this convoluted language, all of these administrative reasons really are about media suppression and media censorship. Britain has a long history of media censorship, going back to most recently to the IRA and to the Falklands War, where, information and news was censored, essentially allowing the British view to be, the British government view, to be the dominant view. So this is an old playbook, if you will. When you're involved in a conflict or a controversy with another state or another country, you don't want that country to be able in any way to influence your own subjects, your own people. And so you ban or you distort or you suppress or you censor their coverage. And that's what this is about, really. They don't want to have 2 points of view. They want to have their point of view as the only point of view. And this is, very clear that the, even the, British broadcasting, British World Service is funded by the British government, by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. It's, Britain is not doing anything different than what Iran is doing, but Britain is choosing to try to prevent an Iranian perspective or other perspectives from being heard. I'm not Iranian. I'm not speaking on behalf of the government in Tehran. I find, and I'm a media analyst in America, I find that Press TV has more diversity of perspective than most American channels.
But Press TV is not taking anything that is not already out there. Is it because they are elaborating more on certain things that are critical of the British government, Danny Schechter? We can mention some, the brutality of the police in dealing with the student protests, and of course the expenditures.
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, that's all part of it here in America. They've been reporting, very rigorously on Occupy Wall Street and other dissenting movements. This doesn't make people in power very happy or very comfortable. The last thing they want is for Americans to start following the news on Press TV or Al Jazeera or RT or any other channel that is not made and controlled in the United States. It's very interesting that their word is control. And control is a big brother concept, who is controlling things. The idea is to basically program the audience to only accept one point of view. And we saw in the war in Iraq, for example, that the coverage in Britain by the domestic channels was almost totally pro-war, while the British World Service was more balanced because it was competing with other international broadcasters. This is about the role of media in our societies and the way media often acts, as basically a voice for government. It marches in lockstep with government. And so Ofcom's reaction here to try to silence Press TV, because that's what it is, it really flows from that kind of imperative to try to control what people are allowed to see, what points of view they're allowed to be exposed to.
Peter Ayer, let's look at another case of Ofcom against Press TV that it has stated it has made moves to revoke the license of Press TV Limited for what it calls Press TV Limited's lack of control. And again, the word control comes through here, as Danny Schechter said, over the channel's broadcast. And this regards to that 10-second Maziar Bahari piece. Now, if Press TV Limited does not have control over the broadcast, why is it getting fined? And vice versa, if it does have control, why is the license being revoked? Peter Ayer?
Yes, I'm here. Go ahead.
Yes, I was talking about the controversy, the contradiction of Ofcom in terms of revoking the license of Press TV Limited in the UK. It's said Press TV Limited's lack of control over the channel's broadcast regarding that 10-second Maziar Bahari piece. Now, the question is, if Press TV Limited does not have control over the broadcast, why is it getting fined? And then vice versa, if it does have control, why is the license being revoked?
Yes, I guess a lot of people around the world used to look towards Britain as being a fairly balanced country, but I don't think that's the case anymore. Danny hit the nail on the head with his assessment of the way the media is going, not just in the UK, but around the world. It's highly censored. There's the issue, of course, of the BBC, to which everyone here pays a fee. And very few people in the world would understand that the BBC almost primarily is funded by the Zionist sector, with a very strong lean towards Israel. I didn't want to bring this in the conversation, but it is a fact. And therefore, this country that promotes democracy around the world and free speech has now been caught in the act of actually cancelling out that methodology in the action against Press TV. I do an awful lot of work for Press TV, as does Danny, and I've always found that Press TV was extremely balanced. when you go up against other people like congressmen or whatever, there's always somebody from both sides, and that to me is a very balanced way of running a media, totally open and allows free speech. And unfortunately, we've now seen the demise of this in the UK, and I would go on to say that, in my opinion, Press TV must be right up there at the top as being one of the best channels that really does reveal the truth. And this is hurting the British government. As an example, I have enough information on the ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and the current Prime Minister to put them in jail for life. Why wouldn't they want to terminate Press TV when you are dealing with people like me?
Well, I'd like to address a question. I'd like to address a question to the Director of Standards, Tony Close of Ofcom. Again, he has refused to participate in this debate, so I'm going to go to our guest in Chicago, Mr. Rick Rozoff. Rick Rozoff, we've talked about some of the contradictions. It has, on several occasions, changed Ofcom, that has changed its decisions regarding Press TV. This being a 2-year campaign against the station. And, of course, we cited administrative problems as one of them. Why do you think it has taken this long for them to actually come through, especially on the administrative part, and, of course, the other contradictions? Give us your assessment.
I want to agree with what Chris and Danny have said. And, obviously, the two accusations that you've mentioned, the simultaneous but contradictory ones, in fact, they're mutually exclusive. One cannot be fined an exorbitant amount, £100,000, as I recall, for alleged responsibility for the content of the program, and at the same time be accused of not being an autonomous entity and so forth. But I think we have to be very clear about this. It's a sort of political exertion and not so much even control, but I think bullying tactics. In American parlance, this is known as a nuisance suit in the law courts, for example, where not having any other way of silencing somebody, you out-lawyer them, you force them to pay exorbitant penalties or to expend money they don't have on legal defense and so forth. So I assume it's something like that. When you ask about the timing of it, let's be honest, this year has not begun very auspiciously for anyone concerned about the fate of humanity and for peace in the world. We're hearing saber rattling from the usual sources, from Washington, from London, and from the capitals of other major NATO countries. And it's an inevitable correlate of this sort of escalation of world tensions that the imperial powers, and like the United States and its Western allies, are going to, of course, suppress or constrict the range, not only of interpretation, as Danny correctly said, so you only get one perspective, but in terms of actual empirical information that will be kept away from readers and listeners and viewers, and an information blackout in essence, so that what we get is quasi-governmental propaganda, as in the case of BBC. We have analogous situations with organizations like National Endowment for Democracy in the United States, which was set up by the government, by Congress, is funded by them, and poses as being, an independent operation when in fact it's totally dependent on the government, and parrots and echoes the government position on issues like that. So I fear that, after the 7-month-long war against Libya last year, the intensification of drone and other military attacks inside Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, the deployment of U.S. military forces in Central Africa, the escalation of a global military threat by the major Western nations, that an inevitable correlate of that is going to be the suppression of any sort of information or any sort of perspective that doesn't jibe with that maniacal drive. Right.
We're going to talk about that suppression momentarily, but Chris Bambury, you're in London. Tell us a little bit about senior decision makers at Ofcom, mostly made up of former Channel 4 and BBC executives. Of course, I'm sure you can expand more on this.
And the chief executive worked for Tony Blair. Now, Tony Blair, in my opinion, is a war criminal who's responsible for taking Britain into an illegal war in Iraq and should be brought to justice. His deputy worked for Peter Mandelson, one of the key figures in that new Labour government, and for Gordon Brown, who became Prime Minister. All of these were complicit in this, in the war in Iraq, in the war in Afghanistan, and much else. And I think you've got to say, and I agree with my fellow guest, that I think you have to say that Britain is following the United States in stepping up aggressively aggression aimed at Iran, and you have got to say that this attempt to shut down Press TV is primarily about that, primarily about isolating Iran, if you like, softening up Iran in preparation for some military adventure, which I fear. But I think also it's worth saying that these are establishment figures who've worked in the media in senior positions in this country in television. They do not like a television company coming, who makes no bones about it, the issue about control. Press TV is honest about where it comes from. I'm talking to you now from Tehran. There's no attempt to hide this. There's no attempt to hide it around the globe. But they do not like an Iranian TV channel operating inside the United Kingdom and asking questions about what is going on inside the United Kingdom. And they do not like it when British people start listening to it, watching it as they do. And I think that it reflects the fact that there is a real contradiction in Britain. There was a vast majority against the war in Iraq that wasn't reflected in the media. There was a majority against the war in Libya that wasn't reflected in the media. And that's why people are turning towards Press TV, because it does represent an alternative view.
Right.
If you want to hear people who support the Occupy movement in Wall Street and in London, watch Press TV. If you want to find out the figures and facts about homelessness in this country, watch Press TV. If you want to find out actually why the deficit is not caused by spending on welfare in this country, it's caused on nationalising the debts drawn up by bankers, watch Press TV. And I agree with my fellow guest that actually you get more debate and discussion on Press TV than you would ever get in a month of Sundays on the BBC.
Right.
And it does raise a question about what the media is in this country and elsewhere in the globe, in America and elsewhere. It's owned by a tiny number of oligarchs like Rupert Murdoch. It's very controlled by those corporate people who mix with the politicians.
Can I jump in for a second?
And its content is reducing to the same.
Hello.
Yes, Danny Schechter, I'm going to come to you. And before you start, Danny Schechter, really,
can I jump in?
Let me just ask you this. You talk about suppression. Our viewers online on PressTV.ir is 100 times more than what people are viewing on a TV. So, the suppression is not really going to work. People are going to tune in one way or another. And, of course, PressTV.ir has everything that Press TV is talking about.
Well, first of all, understand that before you go to war against a country, you just don't plan a military war. You plan a media war. And that's what we saw in Iraq, a media war marching in tandem with the military conflict, with official briefers, embedded journalists, and all sorts of manipulation of news and information. And the same pattern is repeating itself and recycling itself. Ofcom is a media regulator. And it regulates not necessarily in the interests of the public, but in the interests of the media industry. And that hasn't been mentioned here. It's all being assumed that it's the government that's behind everything, and it probably is. But the media companies also don't want the competition. They don't want other voices any more than the government does. And many of the people who are on the regulatory body come out of media organizations where control and often collusion with government is very dominant. So we have to look at that, and we also have to look at attempts to manipulate the Internet, which are underway right now in many countries, cyber war strategies. So this is something that all governments are doing, but the victims of it really is the public. The people themselves are not getting access to a wide range of information that they really need to make decisions and to practice some semblance of democracy.
And when we look at the freedom of expression, since we alluded to that, Peter Eyre, why don't you tell us about that? How is this going to backfire on the public sentiments in the UK of the British government?
Well, I personally feel that as a result of this direct action, the genuine people of the world, the people of the United Kingdom, will find a means of tapping into Press TV no matter what. You could become a pirate station outside of the international limits. Whatever the scenario is, for sure, you will be watched forever and a day. And I clarify again that the government, both political parties, all three political parties are so in debt with corruption and fraud in their own pockets, in conjunction with the banks, as our friend has said in London, etc. That is what's causing the economic downturn. And Press TV are one of those stations that are prepared to reveal this, not just to the UK, to the world. And this hurts the government. The truth hurts anyone. And so Press TV flagship will sail on no matter what. And I believe this will inspire the people here to try that much harder to stay in touch with you.
And quickly, in less than 45 seconds, Rick Rozoff, I'd like to ask you, why is it then that the BBC, which is a state-funded station in a matter of speaking, why are they not being scrutinized when it comes to a variety of issues that they have not presented with the full spectrum of the news?
Well, I mean, it first of all takes a counterforce that is able to hold them to account, which, with the government having monopoly of state power, of funding, of non-private sector funding in the media and so forth. There's one issue I'd like to raise because I think it's been missed. Is that in the West, what is called the free flow of ideas, or free press and so forth, is really is inaccurate. We have to recall, for example, that two of the major press wires.
Okay, I am so sorry. I have to jump in since we ran out of time. That was Rick Rozoff on the phone from Global Research. I'd like to thank political commentator Chris Banbury from London, Emmy Award-winning television producer and editor from MediaChannel.org, Danny Schechter. Thank you so much. Peter Ayer, Middle East consultant, on the phone with his statements from Lima, Peru, and Ofcom's director of standards, Tony Close. Again, we invited him, but he did not appear and participate in this edition of the Press TV News Analysis. And thanks so much for watching. From me, Kaveh Tahveh, and the entire team, it's goodbye.